You're not wrong. I trust you with my whole heart.
Dana Andrews didn't play a hero. He played a monster with a badge. One punch too many, and everything fell apart. Where the Sidewalk Ends wasn't just film noir. It was a collision between two men who hated each other, a script that nearly got banned, and a punch so real it sent someone to the hospital. These are 20 weird facts about Where the Sidewalk Ends. And the bonus? A scene so dark the censors made them reshoot it 3 times, and it still almost didn't make it into theaters. Let's step into the shadows. This one doesn't have a happy ending. Before Where the Sidewalk Ends was a movie, it was a novel nobody wanted to touch. William L. Stewart wrote Night Cry in 1948, a brutal story about a cop whose violence spirals out of control until he becomes the very thing he's supposed to stop. Publishers loved the writing, but hated the content. Too dark, they said, too cynical. Americans don't want to see police as the bad guys. The book barely sold. But Otto Preminger saw something else. He'd just finished directing several successful noirs and was hunting for his next project. Something that pushed boundaries, something dangerous. When he read Night Cry, he didn't flinch at the violence or the moral ambiguity. He leaned in. Preminger bought the rights immediately and hired screenwriter Ben Hest, the fastest pen in Hollywood, to adapt it. Hecht had written Scarface, Notorious, and dozens of other classics. He could turn anything into gold, but even Hecht struggled with this one. The original novel was too bleak, too hopeless. There was no redemption arc, no moment of lightness, just a man destroying himself one bad decision at a time. Hecht spent weeks rewriting, softening edges here, adding a love story there, but keeping the core darkness intact. He knew what Preminger wanted. Not a traditional crime film, a character study of a man at war with himself. And when the final script landed on studio desks, executives panicked. They said it glorified police brutality. They said audiences would hate it. They wanted rewrites, cuts, a different ending. Preminger refused. He told them if they changed one word, he'd walk. The studio blinked. And Where the Sidewalk Ends moved into production, carrying all its darkness with it. What started as an unwanted novel became a film that would redefine what noir could be. Dana Andrews wasn't Preminger's first choice for Detective Mark Dixon. He wasn't even his second. Preminger wanted someone younger, hungrier, someone who could make the violence feel raw and unpredictable. He considered Kirk Douglas, who had the intensity, but was already committed to another project. He looked at Robert Mitchum, whose sleepy-eyed danger would have been perfect, but RKO refused to loan him out. He even tested Sterling Hayden, a newcomer with real-life experience as a Marine and OSS operative during the war. Hayden had the physicality, the 1,000-yard stare, but something was missing. He was too controlled, too measured. Preminger needed someone who could barely contain the rage simmering underneath. Then studio chief Daryl F. Zanuck suggested Dana Andrews, and Preminger initially resisted. Andrews was a star, a leading man. He'd played heroes in The Best Years of Our Lives and romantic leads in Laura. Could he play ugly? Could he play someone audiences might actually despise? Zanuck made the case. He reminded Preminger that Andrews had range, that underneath the handsome exterior was an actor who understood darkness. Andrews had fought his own demons, struggled with alcohol, knew what it felt like to hate yourself. And that's what this role needed, self-loathing. When they finally met, Andrews read one scene, the moment where Dixon realizes he's killed an innocent man. No heroics, no redemption, just cold realization. Preminger watched in silence. Andrews didn't play it big. He played it small, internal, a man shutting down from the inside. And that's when Preminger knew. This wasn't a hero's journey. It was a descent, and Dana Andrews understood descent better than anyone. He got the role, and with it, the chance to show Hollywood he was more than just a pretty face. He could be terrifying. Jean Tierney showed up on set with a secret. She was in the middle of a nervous breakdown. The year before filming began, Tierney's life had fallen apart. Her daughter Daria was born severely disabled after Tierney contracted German measles during pregnancy. From a fan who'd broken quarantine to meet her, the guilt consumed her. Her marriage was crumbling. She'd started experiencing severe depression and mood swings the doctors couldn't explain, but she needed the work. She needed something to hold on to. Preminger knew about her struggles. He'd directed her in Laura 6 years earlier and watched her transform into one of Hollywood's most luminous stars. But this was different. This wasn't the confident, radiant Gene Tierney he remembered. This was someone barely holding it together. During the first week of rehearsals, she broke down twice, forgot lines she'd known perfectly the day before, showed up late, apologized constantly, couldn't maintain eye contact, the crew whispered. Some thought she was being difficult. Others thought she was on something. Nobody knew the truth, that she was fighting to stay present, to not disappear into the darkness that kept pulling at her. Preminger made a choice. He didn't fire her. He didn't replace her. Instead, he protected her. He scheduled her scenes carefully, gave her space when she needed it, never pushed when she was struggling. And slowly, something remarkable happened. The fragility that made her unreliable in life made her perfect for the role. She played Morgan Taylor, a woman caught between loyalty and love, someone watching the man she cares about destroy himself. Every moment of fear, every hesitation, every shadow that crossed her face, it was real. Tierney wasn't acting, she was surviving, and it showed in every frame.
You're not wrong. I trust.
The punch that changed the movie wasn't supposed to happen. In the script, Detective Dixon confronts Ken Payne, a smooth-talking suspect played by Craig Stevens. In a cramped apartment, they argue. Tensions rise, and Dixon throws a single punch. Clean, controlled, choreographed. That's how it was written. That's how they rehearsed it. But on the day of shooting, something went wrong. Dana Andrews was method before method acting had a name. He'd spent days psyching himself up for the scene, remembering every moment in his life when he'd wanted to hit someone, when he'd felt that surge of uncontrollable rage. Preminger called action. Stevens delivered his line with perfect smug condescension, and Andrews snapped. He threw the punch with full force. No pull, no fake. His fist connected with Stevens' jaw like a sledgehammer. Stevens went down hard, not movie hard, real hard. The camera kept rolling. Andrews kept going. The character's rage had become his rage, and for 10 seconds, the line between actor and role disappeared completely. Preminger yelled, "Cut." The crew rushed in. Stevens was dazed, bleeding from his mouth, possibly concussed. They called the medic. Someone helped Stevens to his feet, and Andrews just stood there, breathing hard, hands still clenched, not entirely sure what had just happened. Stevens was taken to the hospital. They kept him overnight for observation. When he returned to set 3 days later, his jaw was bruised, his face swollen. But here's the thing, he didn't complain. Because when he saw the dailies, when he watched that punch land with real weight, real consequence, he understood. That moment of violence wasn't acting anymore. It was truth, and truth in film noir was worth a broken jaw. Preminger kept every frame. It became one of the most visceral, shocking moments in the film.
Let you have it. I've given them instructions.
They shot most of Where the Sidewalk Ends on location in New York City, which sounds simple until you realize how impossible that was in 1950. Hollywood films rarely left the studio lots. Everything was controlled environments, painted backdrops, carefully managed lighting. But Preminger insisted. He wanted real streets, real grime, real shadows. He wanted the city itself to be a character. So the production packed up and headed east. And immediately everything fell apart. The New York Police Department refused to cooperate. They'd read the script. They knew it portrayed a cop as a violent, unstable killer. Department brass said absolutely not. No permits, no assistance, no access. Preminger found a workaround. He'd shoot anyway, guerrilla style. They set up cameras in unmarked vehicles, dressed the crew as pedestrians, filmed without permits, without permission, grabbing shots between real traffic and real crowds. It was chaos. Several times, actual police officers approached, demanding to know what they were doing. The crew would pack up and scatter. Sometimes they got the shot, sometimes they didn't. But every frame they captured had an authenticity that couldn't be faked on a soundstage. The danger was real. During one late-night shoot in a rough neighborhood, someone tried to steal one of the cameras. A production assistant fought back. A small crowd gathered. Real cops actually showed up this time. And instead of shutting them down, one officer recognized Dana Andrews, asked for an autograph, and let them finish the scene. They shot until 4 a.m., capturing the empty streets, the harsh streetlights, the loneliness of a city that never sleeps but sometimes forgets to care. Those stolen moments gave Where the Sidewalk Ends a documentary quality that made the darkness feel even more suffocating. Because this wasn't a set, this was real life. And real life, Preminger knew, was where the monsters lived. The script changed every single day, not minor tweaks, major rewrites. Entire scenes added or cut overnight, and it was driving everyone insane. Ben Hecht had delivered what he thought was a finished screenplay, tight, focused, dark. But Preminger kept seeing problems, a line that felt too soft, a motivation that didn't track, a moment where the audience might sympathize too much with Dixon. And Preminger didn't want sympathy. He wanted complexity. So every morning, new pages arrived. Pink revisions, blue revisions, yellow revisions. The actors would show up having memorized yesterday's dialogue, only to find it completely different. Dana Andrews started carrying a notebook, scribbling notes in the margins, trying to track his character's arc as it shifted day by day. Jean Tierney stopped memorizing entirely. She'd read the new pages on set, absorbed them quickly, and trust her instincts. Some days it worked, some days it didn't. The supporting cast struggled more. Character actors who'd built careers on preparation suddenly found themselves improvising, making up blocking on the fly, hoping they wouldn't screw up the continuity. Carl Malden, playing a detective investigating Dixon, pulled Preminger aside after one particularly brutal day of changes. He asked point blank, "Do you even know how this movie ends?" Preminger smiled and said, "Not yet." That should have been terrifying, but somehow it kept everyone on edge in exactly the right way. The uncertainty, the chaos, the feeling that anything could change at any moment, it bled into the performances. Nobody felt safe. Nobody knew what was coming next. And that paranoia, that tension, it became the texture of the film. Where the Sidewalk Ends wasn't just written, it was discovered, one rewritten scene at a time. And the final product captured that sense of freefall because everyone involved was actually falling. Preminger and Andrews hated each other. Not movie feuds, not creative differences, genuine personal hatred. It started during the first week of rehearsals when Andrews questioned a direction, a simple note, a suggestion about how Dixon might move through a scene. Preminger exploded. He didn't accept notes from actors. He didn't collaborate. He directed. Andrews, who'd worked with patient, collaborative directors before, pushed back. He said Dixon was his character, and he had thoughts about how the man would behave. Wrong move. Preminger told him, in front of the entire cast, that if he wanted to direct, he should get his own movie. Until then, shut up and hit your marks. The set went silent. Andrews' face went red, but he swallowed it. From that moment on, they communicated through intermediaries. Preminger would tell the assistant director what he wanted. The AD would relay it to Andrews. Andrews would have questions. The AD would carry them back. It was absurd. They were standing 15 feet apart, refusing to speak directly. But the hatred worked, because Dixon was supposed to be a man at war with authority, with himself, with everyone around him. And Andrews channeled every ounce of his rage at Preminger into the character. Every scene where Dixon bristles at his superiors, where he barely contains his contempt for the system, that was real. That was Andrews, thinking about Preminger, letting the anger fuel the performance. On the final day of shooting, they wrapped Dixon's last scene. Andrews walked off set without a word, didn't say goodbye to the crew, didn't thank anyone, just left. Preminger watched him go and later told someone, "He gave me exactly what I needed. I just had to make him hate me enough to find it." Calculated cruelty in service of art, film noir in real life.
You don't hate hoodlums. You like to beat them up.
The Production Code Administration nearly killed the entire film, not over violence or language, over morality, where the sidewalk ends centered on a cop who kills someone and gets away with it, at least initially. To the censors in 1950, that was unacceptable. The code was clear. Crime must not pay. The guilty must be punished. Good must triumph over evil. But Preminger's film existed in gray areas. Dixon wasn't purely evil. He was complicated, damaged, human. And that was the problem. The PCA sent back pages of notes. They wanted Dixon punished more explicitly. They wanted him to suffer, to show remorse, to face consequences that left no doubt about the film's moral stance. They flagged specific scenes. The moment where Dixon plants evidence. The confrontation where he lies directly to a superior. The final sequence where he almost gets away with everything. Every gray area had to become black and white. Preminger refused. He argued that real life didn't work that way. Real people made terrible choices and sometimes lived with them. Real guilt was internal, not external. Real punishment was psychological, not just legal. The PCA didn't budge. For weeks, the film sat in limbo. Preminger threatened to release it without code approval, which would have been career suicide. No major theater chain would show it, but he was serious. He'd rather have the film banned than compromised. Finally, a compromise emerged. They'd add one scene, a brief moment near the end where Dixon's conscience visibly breaks him. Not a confession exactly, but a crack in the armor. Preminger agreed, shot the scene in one afternoon, and the PCA reluctantly approved. The film survived, but just barely. And it carried the scars of that battle in every frame, a testament to how close great art comes to never existing at all. The murder scene wasn't supposed to be in the movie, at least not the way it ended up. In the original script, the killing happened off-screen. You'd hear it, maybe see shadows, but the actual violence would be suggested, not shown. Classic noir technique, leave the worst to the imagination. But during production, Preminger changed his mind. He decided the audience needed to see exactly how Dixon lost control, how one punch led to another, then another, until it was too late, how violence once started has its own momentum. So he blocked out a new sequence, a longer, more brutal confrontation in Payne's apartment. Dana Andrews would hit Craig Stevens once. Stevens would fall, and then Dixon would realize, in real time, that he'd gone too far. The camera would stay tight on Andrews' face as the realization hit. Preminger shot it in one continuous take. No cuts, no edits, no escape. The camera locked on Andrews as his character transformed from angry to terrified. You can see the moment his eyes change. When Dixon stops being a cop throwing a punch and becomes a man who just killed someone. It lasted maybe 45 seconds. But in those 45 seconds, the entire film pivoted. This wasn't a story about a bad cop anymore. It was a story about a man watching his own life end in real time. When they screened the scene for the studio, half the room wanted it cut. Too intense, they said. Too disturbing. But the other half knew it was the heart of the movie. Without that moment, Dixon was just another noir character. With it, he was human. Broken, terrifying, but human. Preminger kept it. And that unblinking 45 seconds became the scene film students would study for decades, trying to understand how Andrews made you feel sorry for a killer. By the time Where the Sidewalk Ends wrapped, nobody knew if it would work. The studio was nervous. Test screenings were scheduled, then postponed. Marketing didn't know how to sell it. Was it a crime thriller? A love story? A psychological drama? The posters went through 7 different designs. One focused on the romance between Andrews and Tierney. Another played up the violence. A third tried to make it look like a police procedural. None of them felt right. Because Where the Sidewalk Ends didn't fit into any box. It was too dark for general audiences, but too Hollywood for the art house crowd. Preminger didn't care. He'd made the film he wanted to make. Now it was up to the world to decide if they wanted to watch a man destroy himself for 95 minutes. The first test screening was a disaster. Half the audience walked out during the murder scene. The other half sat in uncomfortable silence. No laughter at the few light moments. No gasps at the twists. Just oppressive, heavy quiet. Studio executives panicked. They wanted reshoots. They wanted a happier ending. They wanted something, anything, to make it more palatable. Preminger walked out of the meeting. 2 weeks later, they tried again. Different city, different audience. And something strange happened. This crowd stayed. They watched Dixon spiral, watched him lie, watched him fight against the inevitable. And when the lights came up, they sat in silence for a full minute. Not bored silence, thoughtful silence. Someone finally stood up and started clapping. Slowly, others joined. It wasn't a standing ovation, but it was respect. Acknowledgement that they'd seen something real, something that didn't apologize for its darkness. Where the Sidewalk Ends was released quietly in 1950, made its money back, and then disappeared. But it never really went away. Carl Malden almost quit 3 times. He'd been cast as Lieutenant Thomas, Dixon's colleague who slowly pieces together what really happened. It should have been straightforward. but Preminger kept changing the character's motivation. One day, Thomas suspected Dixon from the start. The next, he was completely oblivious. Then he became complicit, then horrified, then somewhere in between. Malden couldn't find consistency. He'd approach scenes one way, and Preminger would redirect him completely. After the 10th revision, Malden walked to his trailer and started packing. Dana Andrews found him and said something that stuck. Stop trying to understand him. Just play what's on the page today and let Preminger figure it out. Malden unpacked, stopped overthinking, and gave one of his most naturalistic performances. Years later, he admitted the confusion actually helped because Thomas was supposed to be a man watching his friend unravel without fully understanding why. The uncertainty in Malden's performance wasn't acting. It was genuine bewilderment about what his character knew and when he knew it. The final scene was reshot 6 times, not because of technical problems, because Preminger couldn't decide how much hope to leave. In the original version, Dixon walks away from everything with a slight smile, ambiguous but suggesting he might get away with it. Test audiences hated it. They wanted justice. So Preminger reshot it with Dixon turning himself in. Full confession, complete surrender. Now audiences felt manipulated, like the film was pandering. They tried a version where Dixon simply disappears into a crowd, his fate unknown. Too artsy. One version had Morgan crying. Another had her stoic. They shot Dixon getting into a police car. They shot him walking into fog. They even shot an ending where he dies, though that never made it past the studio. Finally, Preminger landed on something subtle. Dixon makes a choice, but we see it in his eyes before we see the action. A moment of acceptance of knowing there's only one way this ends. It wasn't satisfying in a traditional sense, but it was honest. Gene Tierney's wardrobe tells a story nobody discusses. Costume designer Bonnie Cashin dressed Morgan in increasingly darker colors as the film progresses. She starts in soft grays and creams, looking almost angelic. By the final act, she's wearing deep blacks and navy blues, visually descending with Dixon. But there's one scene where she wears white again. The moment she decides to trust him, despite knowing something's wrong. Cashin later explained it wasn't about purity. It was about denial, about Morgan trying to hold on to an image of Dixon that no longer existed. The white dress in that scene wasn't innocence. It was desperation. Preminger loved the choice and built the lighting around it, making her practically glow while Dixon remained in shadow. When they share the frame, she looks like she's from a different movie entirely, which was exactly the point. She was clinging to a romance that belonged in a different genre. The jazz score almost didn't happen. 20th Century Fox wanted a traditional orchestral soundtrack, sweeping strings and dramatic crescendos. But Preminger fought for something modern, something that felt like the city itself. He brought in composer David Raskin, who'd scored Laura years earlier. Raskin suggested a stripped-down jazz ensemble, heavy on brass and bass, with no melody you could hum. The studio rejected it. Too experimental, too cold. Preminger recorded it anyway, using his own money. When he cut the film with both scores, traditional versus jazz, the difference was stunning. The orchestral version made it feel like a costume drama. The jazz made it feel like a documentary. Studio executives reluctantly agreed. The jazz stayed. And it changed how noir films were scored. Suddenly, other directors wanted that same urban, nocturnal sound. That bass line that felt like footsteps on empty streets. Raskin's work on Where the Sidewalk Ends influenced crime film music for the next decade. They built an entire New York police station on a soundstage, and it was more authentic than the real thing. Production designer Lyle Wheeler obsessed over details. He interviewed NYPD detectives, studied precinct layouts, collected actual wanted posters and incident reports. He made the desks cluttered with real paperwork. The coffee was real. The cigarette burns in the wood were real. Wheeler even installed working radiators that clanked and hissed during a filming. Actors said it felt like a genuine police station, which affected how they moved through the space. They leaned against walls, touched props, inhabited the environment instead of just walking through it. During one scene, Dana Andrews opened a desk drawer, looking for something to do with his hands, found an actual case file Wheeler had planted, and started reading it. Preminger kept rolling. That moment of genuine discovery made it into the film. Craig Stevens never forgot that punch. Years later, doing interviews for other projects, reporters would inevitably ask about Where the Sidewalk Ends. Stevens would smile, touch his jaw, and say Dana Andrews hit him harder than any stuntman ever did. But he didn't hold a grudge. He understood what Andrews was chasing, that moment of absolute authenticity. Stevens admitted that after returning from the hospital, he was actually scared of Andrews for the rest of the shoot. Not personally, but he couldn't separate the actor from the character. Whenever Dixon appeared in a scene, Stevens felt genuine tension, genuine fear. And that translated on screen. Their remaining scenes together crackle with real unease. You can see Stevens keeping physical distance, watch him flinch slightly before Andrews even moves. Preminger noticed and exploited it, blocking scenes to maximize Stevens' discomfort, method acting by accident. The film's title came from a William Blake poem, though most audiences never made the connection. Blake wrote about innocence and experience, about the corruption that comes from navigating the world. Preminger loved the metaphor. Where does the sidewalk end? Where civilization stops and chaos begins? Where the rules no longer apply? Where good men become monsters? He wanted the title to feel poetic and ominous, to suggest that Dixon had walked past some invisible boundary and couldn't find his way back. The studio thought it sounded pretentious and tried to change it to something simpler. The Guilty Man, or Mark Dixon's Fall, or just Night Streets. But Preminger held firm. He said the title wasn't meant to be understood immediately. It was meant to linger, to make people think after the credits rolled. Where does the sidewalk end for any of us? How far would we go before crossing our own line? Preview audiences in 1950 were completely unprepared for the film's bleakness. Crime movies usually offered catharsis. The bad guy gets caught, justice prevails, order restored. But Where the Sidewalk Ends offered no such comfort. Dixon wasn't a villain who needed catching. He was a man trapped by his own nature, by his father's legacy, by violence that lived in his DNA. Some viewers found it profound. Others found it depressing. Several preview cards simply read, "Too dark," with no other comment. One woman wrote, "Why would anyone make a movie with no heroes?" But a smaller group responded intensely, writing detailed reactions about how the film captured something true about masculine rage, about inherited trauma, about how easily ordinary people can become something terrible. These responses fascinated Preminger. He realized he'd made a film that split audiences completely. You either saw yourself in Dixon's struggle, or you rejected the premise entirely. There was no middle ground. Dana Andrews never spoke about the role afterward, not because he was ashamed, but because it had cost him something. Friends said he seemed different after filming, wrapped, quieter, more withdrawn. His wife noticed he'd wake up in the middle of the night, pacing, unable to settle. Andrews had touched something dark in himself to play Dixon, and he couldn't completely shake it off. Method actors talked about this years later, about the psychological cost of inhabiting damaged characters. But in 1950, actors were just expected to show up, hit their marks, and go home. Nobody talked about emotional residue. Andrews carried it alone. He made dozens more films, played dozens more roles, but colleagues said he never committed quite as fully again. Where the Sidewalk Ends took something from him, and in exchange, it gave audiences one of the most psychologically complex performances in noir history. The film didn't become a classic overnight. It took decades. When it first released, critics were mixed. Some praised the performances and Preminger's direction. Others found it too nihilistic, too cold. It made money, but wasn't a sensation. Then it disappeared, overshadowed by bigger noir films like Sunset Boulevard and In a Lonely Place. But film students kept discovering it. In the 60s and 70s, revival houses started showing it. Critics began writing about Preminger's visual style, about Andrews' performance, about how the film predicted the anti-heroes that would dominate cinema in later decades. By the 80s, Where the Sidewalk Ends had been reevaluated completely. Now, it was taught in film schools, analyzed in books about noir, recognized as one of the darkest, most uncompromising crime films ever made. Preminger lived long enough to see the reassessment. Someone asked if he felt vindicated. He just shrugged and said, "The film was all but good. People just needed time to catch up." there's a scene that got cut that would have changed everything. In it, Dixon visits his father's grave, stands there in the rain, talking to a headstone. The father was a corrupt cop who died in disgrace, and Dixon's entire life has been spent trying to prove he's different. In this deleted scene, he finally admits he's not. He's the same, maybe worse. It was beautifully written, powerfully acted. Dana Andrews played it with complete vulnerability. But Preminger cut it, not because it wasn't good, because it explained too much. He wanted Dixon's rage to feel inexplicable, primal. The moment you understood where it came from, you could rationalize it, maybe even forgive it. Preminger didn't want forgiveness. He wanted audiences to sit with the discomfort of a man they couldn't fully understand or dismiss. So, the scene vanished. Years later, the footage was found in studio archives. Film scholars call it one of the great lost moments of noir. But Preminger was right. The film is stronger, more unsettling without it. Because some darkness doesn't need explanation. It just needs to be witnessed.